One of the shocking international occurrences other than the capture of Operation Just Cause in Panama of 1989 occurred on the 3rd of January this year when the Venezuelan citizens woke up to an explosion, and shortly after, within 5 minutes, the US troops had walked into the residences of the president of Venezuela, Honorable Maduro, and captured him and his wife and left without a trace. Now later on we are going to put that full story here at the People's Mirror fully, but first, in this particular episode we are bringing it up because Honorable Eugene Wamalwa, who is the party leader of the DAP Kenya party, whose deputy recently actually walked away to join the Ruto's camp in the broad-based arrangement, now reveals that a Venezuelan company called Smartmatics is actually the company that is now going to oversee the presidential elections and all other elections in 2027. Honorable Eugene Wamalwa alongside Honorable Kalonzo Musyoka now faults the IEBC for renewing this particular contract illegally, and of course for settling on Venezuelan individuals that in the previous elections were actually being accused of having taken away President, of course, Raila Amolo Odinga's win. But before Honorable Eugene Wamalwa made those statements, and even before we talk about the capture by the Delta Force elite team of the US military that happened on the 3rd of January this year, and all other elite attacks that they have concluded in the recent past, let us first start with the statements of Eugene Wamalwa that were casting doubts on the efficiency of this particular commission to hold the elections of 2027, now being the biggest uproar that has come out of the united opposition, calling for reshuffling of the IEBC, including removal of the CEO of the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission, Honorable Marjan, on the basis of the accusations that he is corrupt and he has done this particular deal renewal illegally.
Isiwahi kudhulumu ile haki ya kuabudu ambayo kwa miaka hii yote haijakuwa interfered with by any administration. This is going to be the first administration kuingilia makanisa. So we stand with you as the united opposition in saying, Bwana Ruto, the freedom of worship is one of the most sacred freedoms in our constitution. Na sisi kama upinzani hatutakubali hii serikali iweze kuinterfere with that sacred freedom ambayo ina guarantee freedom of worship to all of us, sio tu makanisa, sisi sote tukiwa wa Kenya. So Bwana Mbui, kazi kwenu, sababu we know that will come to parliament. Na watu wa Kadiani, we are very proud of the member of parliament ambaye ametupa huyu Bwana Robert Mbui. Yeye amekuwa ndio komanda katika bunge letu. He has led our team kama minority leader wetu. And all retrogressive legislation imeletwa kwa bunge. Yeye ndiye ameongoza timu yetu kule bungeni. Kutoka ile finance bill ya 2023 iliyotoa bottom ikapeleka up kwa mambo ya ushuru. Huyu Bwana Mbui ndiye aliongoza timu yetu kupiga no kwa hiyo finance bill. Finance bill 2023 ilipoletwa tena, yeye ndiye ameongoza timu yetu kupinga ile finance bill. Ilisababisha vijana wetu Gen Z 65 of them kuuawa because of bad legislation, akiwemo mjukuu wa Mwidumbingu Rex Masai kutoka hapa Machakos. Yeye ndiye alikuwa kati ya wale Gen Z wa kwanza waliouawa na serikali.
Of course, that was very close to the hearts of the people of Machakos, and of course the Gen Zs, when Honorable Eugene Wamalwa talked about the killing of Rex Masai. We call it for whatever it is. Rex Masai was killed for actually standing up for the aspirations of the people of Kenya and for the youth. And every single day that the demonstrations of 2024 and 2025 comes to the minds of every youth in the Kenyan space, the name Rex Masai, of course, rings a very sad bell of those days. Now, this particular statement that were being made by Eugene Wamalwa formed the basis of his speech, where he started by first defending the church, and not only the church, but the freedom of worship that is open to everyone and every Kenyans, not only isolation to those that identify with the Christian faith. Now he talks of himself just like Gachagua of actually being very proud of Robert Mbui. It seems like Robert Mbui was having a very good accolade day from the United Opposition with this particular meeting, or this particular burial that was happening in Katiani in Machakos, and perhaps this could actually be a very good footing for him into the major polls next year. But Honorable, of course, Eugene Wamalwa used that time basing his speech largely on the guarantee of freedom of speech, giving examples of the same being entrenched in all the constitutions, the previous constitution and this new constitution, and telling President Ruto that the writing is on the wall on the freedom of speech. Honorable Eugene Wamalwa said that there is no going back to it. He says to Ruto that currently Ruto's plan is violence, saying that the violence that has been meted towards the United Opposition now confirms only one thing, that President William Ruto has learnt and is of course aware that the opposition is rising and the country is rejecting him. And so to ensure that of course a lot of these meetings of the United Opposition are not held across the country, and his political stature as the president weakened now and post 2027, according to Eugene Wamalwa, the president has now resorted into violence. Now let's put a comment before we put the video. You see, we have not seen a lot of violence, of course, actually being directed to President William Ruto's rallies. And you could say perhaps that the people hate him, but you have not seen any violence being meted at his rallies. Why? Perhaps because he has the security personnel in order, or perhaps he is the chief perpetrator of this violence that Honorable Eugene Wamalwa is accusing him of, because we have seen violence being meted towards President William Ruto's opponents whenever they are holding this particular rally. So most of them have been meted towards Rigathi Gachagua. But then there's also another angle to it. Perhaps just the Kenyan people are so undecided whether it is President Ruto or Rigathi Gachagua, and so whenever they see Rigathi Gachagua, they feel like the section that supports President William Ruto feels like it is their obligation to move with or without the order of the president. So in this particular issue of violence, we really need to look at it very, very sensitively. Is it being choreographed by one end of a political divide, or is it an innate calling of this particular end of the political divide that without any instructions, whenever they see the opposition, they feel like their most immediate reaction should be violence? But from the United Opposition, it seems like the buck starts and of course stops with the president. And Honorable Eugene Wamalwa is saying that this violence that is being meted towards the United Opposition is a reflection of the fact that President William Ruto has read the writing on the wall and is aware that the people is against his policies now and come 2027.
So kwa hivyo when this legislation comes, we have confidence ya kwamba he will lead our team. Hata wakati impeachment ya Rigiji imekuja bungeni, yeye ndio amesimama na kulead team yetu kupiga no kwa hiyo impeachment. Eti wanasema ati Rigiji alikuwa anapigania mambo ya shares ya mlima. Kwa sasa tunasikiza wenzetu kule Nyanza also fighting for shares. Kweli si kweli? Wana ODM wanasema hao wanataka share kubwa zaidi ya ile share wamepewa. Wale mawaziri wachache wamepewa. Hata wameanza kudemand wapewe sasa ile position ilikuwa ya Rigiji. They are also fighting for the same shares. So that impeachment haikuwa na any basis. And we know that in the fullness of time, Bwana Rigiji will be vindicated. So kule tunaenda, we are looking forward to, na hiyo sio tu hii mambo ya freedom of worship. Ile katiba ambayo tulipigania hapa wakati wa uhuru wa kwanza, tukiwa na mzee hapa Paul Ngei, akiwa na Jomo Kenyatta na Jaramogi na Masinde Muliro na Ngala, hiyo katiba ya kwanza guarantees the same freedoms including worship, freedom of expression, freedom of movement na freedom zozote za ku-associate under any political formation. Ile katiba ya pili ambayo pia tumepigania second liberation, tukiwa tena na mzee Ndenga alitoka hapa, tukiwa na Bamaris, Masinde Muliro, Jaramogi na wengine, that constitution that we now call 2010 constitution guarantees the same freedoms. Kwa hivyo hatutakubali any retrogressive politics ya Bwana Ruto that would undermine the same constitution. Not just freedom of worship, freedom of movement and association. Sasa tunaona jana ndugu yetu Rigiji anaenda kufanya mkutano. Yeye anatoka Nyeri County, wanamzuia asiingie Nyeri. Anaenda Kagio kule Kirinyaga, wanamzuia, wanampiga tear gas. Sisi tunajua ya kwamba Bwana Ruto anajua it's a matter of time. the writing is on the wall, na hiyo writing on the wall inasema ni one. Hii ni kitu anajua. So there are few things he wants to use, and his choice weapon is violence. Tumeona akitumia fujo kwa hii uchaguzi mdogo pale Malawi. Walitumia a lot of violence.
Yeah, so he demanded institution tasked to deal with security to respond. Of course, in that particular part of his speech, Honorable Eugene Wamalwa was saying that when they were attacked in Chwele Kabuchai ward, and later on when they were attacked in Mbeere North, and later on when their vehicles were burnt, of course, in Malava, they reported all these particular deals to the Independent Policing Oversight Authority, that is the IPOA. And until now, he feels, or they feel as a united opposition, that no solid action has come out of those reporting, even if there is enough evidence to show that the police was used in a manner that is not within their roles under the National Police Service Act, that is to maintain law and order, but was actually used in a very political manner to subdue the united opposition. Now, Eugene calls for the parties or their respective bodies that are, of course, charged with this particular mandate to look into that. Now, that is the soundbite that we want to play before he blames the Venezuelans, and we return this story back to the 3rd of January this year when the Venezuelan attack occurred.
Wakachoma magari yetu, wakaumiza, wakaua watu hadi kule Chwele. Tumeona violence upande wa Mbeere. And now he is starting to unleash violence on the opposition. Tumeenda kuzika juzi mke wa JM Kariuki pale Nyandarua, tukiwa na Mheshimiwa Kalonzo na Rigiji. Kutoka kule kufika mji wa Gilgil, ile violence tuliona pale, na sisi tunasalimia wananchi. Walisema msipite, mtusalimu. Wakaleta fujo pale. Juzi tukiwa na huyu Senator Seki, tumekuwa Narok. Rigiji akakuja kuomba kura kuombea senator wake. Ile fujo tuliona kule, nikaona Rigiji akatoa helmet. Sijui hiyo helmet ulitoa wapi wana. Sababu Rigiji amejua he's targeted. Amejipanga. Sasa pia bwana Kalonzo lazima pia tuanze kutafuta hiyo helmet. Lazima tujipange sababu Kasongo has sensed defeat, and that is why they are going to resort to violence. And today we want to demand institutions that have been tasked to provide security, to deal with goons, to deal with violence. Why are you not acting? IPOA, tangu huyu rafiki yangu Victor Munyaka, huyu jamaa alipigwa karibu awawe, Range Rover yake kapigwa risasi, sijui ilikuwa ngapi? Risasi 3. Tukawa na Senator Medhu who was attacked. Jamle Kamau was attacked. Sisi sote tulienda IPOA. Report tumepeana hadi sasa. Tangu Julai mwaka jana, the attack in Kivumo on our team kule Murang'a, not a single arrest has been made. Tangu Malava, Mbeere, Chwele, not a single arrest has been made. IPOA kazi yenu ni nini? IEBC wana uwezo wa kudisqualify any candidate perpetrating violence. Since we reported, up to now IEBC has taken no action. Na mimi nakubaliana na Mheshimiwa Kalonzo Musyoka ya kwamba unless we clean up IEBC before the next general election, we will not have a free and fair election. Unless Wio Marjan atolewe, the CEO, na ile timu yake kutoka Venezuela wanaitwa Smartmatics, we will not have a free and fair election.
There it is now. The blame against the Venezuelans came out from Honorable Eugene Wamalwa's speech yesterday at Ukambani. Now, let us look at this Venezuelan approach and why is the Venezuelan individuals involved in this particular story. Before I talk about the Delta Force and the capture of Venezuela, which was very, very systematic, of course, and happened on the 3rd of this particular month, I'm perhaps happened to have been in one of the election petitions of this country that was being discussed, of course, in one of the higher courts. And one of the key witnesses was the former Attorney General, Honorable Githu Muigai. And I remember very, very well that one of the key aspirants of the LSK chairperson role right now was the acting counsel on behalf of the accused person. And the major issue, now that it is in public domain, the major issue was when it came to procurement of this particular voter cards, and specifically the procurement of the voter cards on North Mugirango part of this particular country. Now, by that time, we were representing the client, who was also a commissioner of the IEBC, who was being faulted for actually falsely procured this particular documents for North Mugirango, or got into an illegal procurement deal outside the IEBC doctrine. Now, this thing is a very sensitive issue when it comes to renewing an IBC deal without, or an IBC contract without going through the channels that are provided for within the policy documents of the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission to do that. And so an accusation to this level could actually have Honorable Marjan answering a lot of questions before the courts now or later on, when his service is over, because even in the case that Honorable Attorney General was a witness of, former Honorable Attorney General was a witness in, the people were being prosecuted after their service in the IEBC. Now, the Smartmatics issue with the Venezuelan is a very sensitive thing. Of course, we understand that Kenya cannot, of course, fully procure or fully develop the documents that are required in an election process, including the voter cards, including the biometrics, and such like things. We have not done that so far, and we keep procuring them from outside. But even the procurement chain is one that needs to be very, very open and verifiable when it is matters dealing with IBC, because of the nature of trust that people has put in this particular commission as the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission that should oversee elections with utmost independence, efficiency and fairness, without siding to either side of the government. And so right now, a revelation from Honorable Eugene Wamalwa displays the IEBC as an already compromised IEBC. When you listen to the statements of Kalonzo Musyoka, the IEBC is compromised. If a former IEBC commissioner is now an advisor to President William Ruto in the State House, then it means that everything pertaining IEBC previously is already within the knowledge of President William Ruto. And so with an Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission, there is no much changes that go on in the process, or in the way that they operate. That's why it remains an utmost secret of the commissioners. I think they even swear an oath to keep it at an utmost secrecy level. That was a very hard use of words, but yeah, to keep it at a very, very high secrecy level, whatever goes on within the IBC. So when a commissioner serves within the IBC and leaves the IBC to become, of course, an advisor of the president, then the president is assumed to have all the information that pertains to the operations of the IBC. And even if now the new formed commission can change a few here and there within the operations of the IBC, the major bulk of it remains a knowledge of the president, giving one side of a political divide an advantage over the other. So the involvement of Professor Gulie, of course, as an advisor of President William Ruto after exiting the IBC is, of course, really, really questionable and is hurting the independence of this commission. And of course, now this statements by Marjan renewing a contract illegally without going through the established procurement systems, which we will verify, of course, whether or not this particular deal was done illegally, shows you that, of course, these particular statements being hinted by the united opposition are driving to a point of showing impartiality. Ladies and gentlemen, where there's smoke, there is fire. And as we go on with our analysis and we delve into this particular IBC issue, we'll keep our eyes fixed to answer these key questions for you. Do you believe, of course, that Honorable Marjan is corrupt, or are these just statements of the united opposition? Do you want Venezuelan Smartmatics to actually be the company that oversees your election in 2027 after they were blamed of not having a fair election in 2022. Please let us know in the comments whether or not you support the move by Professor Gulie to actually now become an advisor of the president under this particular schemes, having been a commissioner within the IEBC. Now, of course, let's a little bit quite back to the story that I started with. That was on the 3rd of January this month. What happened is that Venezuelans, of course, woke up to an explosion that was already planned as back as August the previous year. So they woke up to this explosion in January 3rd, but this plan, now sources reveal, had begun all the way in August last year. And how did it begin? Some few CIA officials, that is the Central Intelligence Agency, one of the places that God willing one day I hope to actually stem and work for. Now that's just on the side, but the CIA actually had infiltrated this particular space and had walked into Maduro's area and Maduro's country as early as August. Now, one thing that is very interesting with the Central Intelligence Agency that makes it at a very admirable space to work at is that their level of operations are highly secretive to the extent that these particular individuals that had infiltrated Maduro's camp then as early as August did not have any embassy or any diplomatic agency to run back to should they be found. So what does that mean? These guys were completely operating naked without any support or any protection from the Central Intelligence Agency, and if they were caught, of course, you know the punishment, it would have been so brutal, death, because they did not have any embassy or diplomatic entity to run back to if they were caught. But they risked it and stayed in Venezuela from the period of August, September, October, November, December. When people were celebrating Christmas, they were already in there, all the way to January when this particular attack was being done. So the question is, what were they doing? And this is the answer. This is what they were doing. They were learning the residences of Maduro and of course the movements of Maduro, so they could capture where does he go, where does he live, how many houses does he have, where does he sleep, and all this particular information was being relayed back to New York. And New York now created a Kentucky how do I call it, placebo. They created actually a placebo platform. It's not a placebo test, but rather than a fake platform that now mirrors the residences of Maduro, the movements of Maduro, the parliament structure, the military base, and whatever is in Venezuela and all that stuff. And now from August last year, when this information arrived at New York and a Kentucky placebo setup was set, this particular elite from the Delta Force were already training in that particular area for all this period to come and capture Maduro. Now, I've mentioned the Delta Force. The Delta Force are based on California, and they actually picked from the US best military men and women, and they have done very historical things, including the Just Cause. Of course, it was called Operation Just Cause of 1989, the first time that the United States of America infiltrated on a different state and uplifted the president just the way they did with Maduro. And of course, remember in 1993, there was this is the first time that the American Hawks were actually being shot down, and it was called no boots on the ground policy. It came as a result of the Hawk that was shot down in Mogadishu. Now, the part of the team that was the Mogadishu team that had one of the American Hawks being shot down and the no boots on the ground policy being entrenched. What does the no boots on the ground policy mean? Pardon me, I'm always so interested when talking about American politics in the international space because I have done a little bit reading on it. When you talk about the no boots policy, right now, no boots on the ground policy, right now, Americans have a policy that when they are going to help on a critical situation of war, for example, like in the Somali or of unrest of whatever kind, then none of their boots will be on the ground. So this means that they will do all their attacks and all their involvement from on top of the sky, but they will not come to the ground because of the American soldiers that died as a result of the attack aimed at them in Mogadishu in 1993. But I was saying that this attack was also, of course, perpetrated by the Delta Force. Then that was when the Black Hawks went down. So the Black Hawks down, you can find it online on the Mogadishu operation. Then after 9/11, the first entry into Afghanistan was of course being done by this particular special force called the Delta Force. And of course you remember the capture of Saddam Hussein in 2003, that was also done by the Delta Force. Now this very elite group was the group that have been training in Kentucky for all this time and found their way into Venezuela and captured the Venezuelan president. Now you ask yourself, how then did they capture the Venezuelan president? Now it's very funny because the airports would have been checked, the airspace would have been checked by the military if they were coming. So how then did they get into this particular space without going through the airspace and of course going through the airport? Now sources revealed that the aircrafts that they used were flying above 100 meters above the sea level. Now if you can picture the sea level and just 100 meters above it, that you can see how low these particular helicopters were flying and these particular special planes were flying to capture Maduro. And so their international radar, or the space, I don't know how they call it, but there's the term that they give the international space that is above our head, and there's also a term that they give the aircraft space before you get to the international space. So there's how the space is divided. Of course the rule is called the sujus est solum rule, that whatever a person owns, he owns it to deep down in the ground and up to the sky. So if you own land, then you own it deep to the ground and up to the sky. But then there's a limitation to that rule. Oil and resources below your land belongs to the government, and there's a limit that if you get to up to the sky, there's the airspace that belongs to the international space. So the space between land up to that particular airspace is often regulated by your government, but beyond that particular airspace, the regulation is an international space. Now these guys, instead of using that particular airspace area where the military could have been surveilling, they used the ground, because 100 meters just top of the sea level is a ground level. And that is what they use. So the helicopters were flying at a very lower height compared to Ngong Hills, if you are considering it in terms of heights of buildings. And another thing is that the people that came to take Maduro did not come under one plane. They had different planes, but they did not come under one plane. They were coming from different naval points, others were coming from reserve points, other assets were coming directly from New York, and these people just used the normal means to enter this particular country. Then upon arriving at the country is when now their special flights were already waiting for them. Now this attack might be centered around Maduro's residence, but that was not the primary place where the attack took place. They took over the airport first, they took over the military base, then they took over the parliament. These were key places that would have averted their operation. And now Trump says that there was a lot of resistance even in the house, as if they had known that the US country was coming, and Maduro himself tried to hide into the safe space, but because this training has already been going on in Kentucky all this while, they knew all those movements and they put a stop to it. Now that particular interesting capture now had the president of Venezuela, Honorable Maduro, and his wife being captured and being delivered to New York against all these particular eruptions coming from the international space. But that cannot downplay the efficiency and the speed with which the US government did that. Now these particular Venezuelans are finding themselves within the Kenyan space after their leader has actually been captured to now oversee our election. Ladies and gentlemen, that marks the end of our analysis of this episode. Please let us know your comments and your thoughts in the comment section. Until our next episode.